Welcome to Friends with Fertility, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of fertility, reproductive health, and all the emotional journeys that are in between. I'm your host, Elizabeth King, a fertility expert dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, support, and inspiration you need on your path to parenthood. Whether you're just starting out, exploring your options, or looking for solidarity and advice, we are here for you. Let's embark on this journey together and turn uncertainty into empowerment and make friends with fertility. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Friends with Fertility. Today we have Nora DeBora. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you
That
are.
is so fun. I love that name. She's a functional fertility coach, holistic nutritionist, and fertility awareness practitioner, and the host of the Ultimate Pregnancy Prep podcast, who helps women and couples prepare for pregnancy and have a healthy baby. Through her high-touch private one-on-one fertility coaching, she helps couples get to the root cause of their health imbalances and coach them through targeted protocols to improve their fertility outcomes and successfully get pregnant. When she's not coaching, you can find her indulging in gourmet burgers, yum, me too, and sweating in a yoga class or long hikes with her huskies. So thank you so much for being here, Nora.
My pleasure, Elizabeth. Thank you
It's
for
always
having me.
fun to have another coach and somebody that we can, I always say, to like geek out on all this stuff with. So I'm excited for that. So tell us about your story. How did you become a fertility coach and why are you so passionate about this work?
I've always been passionate about women's health. I kind of started a little bit later in the game in the health and wellness industry. I was a psych major, and then I did a post grad in HR, and then I ended up working at a children's hospital here in Toronto in HR for many, many, many years. And I realized this is not for me. So I went back, I did my yoga teacher training, went back to school for holistic nutrition, and then fell in love with just all things health and wellness. Now, being a woman myself, with menstrual cycles and just dealing with the menstrual cycle when I was younger, I was just fascinated by hormones. So I decided to kind of niche my health and wellness business as a holistic nutritionist. At that time, I was a personal trainer, I was a yoga instructor, and I really focused on women's health. I would say by the time my mid 30s came around, I had always wanted to be a mom. That was a strong desire of mine since I was a little girl. I grew up with four brothers. My youngest brother was 6 years younger than me. So when he was born, he was like my baby. My mom was like, take him. She had so many kids already. I was like, he's mine. So I changed his diapers, did all the things. But as my life story had it, I didn't find my partner until later in life. And so in my mid 30s, as I was kind of going through the motions of dating and figuring out what I'm going to do with myself and my fertility, I was like, let me just do some deep diving into the fertility space. I'm a health and wellness professional already. This is going to be easy. Let me do some tweaks and fine tunes to see how I can really optimize my health so that when it's time for me to have a baby, it's probably going to be later. At this point, I was already in my mid 30s. Then, it will be easy for me. And that was literally the catalyst that opened up this whole world of fertility and realizing that so many women were not only waiting longer to have babies, but they were struggling with fertility. So, struggling with getting pregnant, not understanding their body, not understanding their menstrual cycle. And that's when I decided to niche my business in the fertility space. Now, fast forward, I'm 42 years old right now, and I have a wonderful partner, but I've done a lot of work and like healing in my own therapy that I don't I'm not sure I want children anymore. So it was an interesting journey, the way it kind of took me and pushed me to become a professional in the fertility space. So I don't necessarily have an infertility personal experience per se, but I have my own journey that led me here. And now I just like, this is my ultimate passion and purpose. And I love, love, love the work that I do. And I'm sure you can attest to this, Elizabeth. It's so gratifying. It's so, so, so gratifying.
It is. It truly, I feel like I tell people all the time I could talk to the wall just about fertility stuff because I love it that much, even if nobody's listening. So thank you for sharing that story. And also interesting to note that you're thinking that maybe you don't want to have kids. And I think that that is good to point out because in society in general, whether you're in the US or Canada or Europe or wherever you are, we have been trained that that is just what you do. And I do think that there's this new narrative of really starting to regulate our own decisions to say, is this truly something that I want? And and that it's okay to say yes or no to that, regardless of whether or not you're in your 40s or your 20s or whatever, and also to change your mind at any point. Now, obviously, as we get older, that changes the dynamic and the landscape of what our options are. But I think it's also really good to let people know that it's okay to say, I don't want to do this, and not feel like that has to be the end game, so to speak, that we're all striving towards. So I appreciate you being honest about that, because I think a lot of people aren't honest about that and
Mhm.
don't truly look inside and really self-reflect on the idea of maybe this isn't really what I want for my life. So
Yeah, and I
I
would say that
appreciate that.
that definitely shifted and changed in my late 30s into my early 40s as I was going through all my work internally. Because the desire for having children was always there. Like that wasn't a false desire. I think also it came with maybe just like you said, kind of what culture or society says this is what everybody needs to do. Like I strongly love children. I have a very big maternal instinct. I'm taking care of everybody all the time. But yeah, my mind has changed and it's beautiful to be able to look forward in a light with the opportunity that what could life look like without children, because before I was so tunnel visioned and I have to have children come hell or high water. I'm going to do it whatever way I'm going to get it done. And so it's been nice. I remember I had that aha moment about, well, what could life look like with no children? Oh my gosh, I can travel more. I can do all these things. And I just started to get really excited about those possibilities because I never let myself think about it before.
Well, my very good friend Lana Medikowski just came out with her book of So Now What, because she did decide not to go through with having children and have a childless marriage life, whatever it is. And she has this beautiful book about kind of
I'm going to
how
have to
to
read
find
that.
your direction now after that.
Yeah.
So, yes, check that out.
So now what?
Okay.
So
Yes.
now what? Okay, I'm gonna write that down.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes. So let's talk about the vaginal microbiome. I know for me, I had even I've always known about the gut microbiome because I have had gut issues. So of course you're very well versed in that if you are somebody that has that. The first time I heard about the vaginal microbiome though was before I had my first baby, which I knew was going to be a C-section, and I started getting calls from my older sister and some of her friends that are very um for lack of a better term, let's just say hippy dippy with the way they think. And oh God, you're going to have a C-section, and your baby's not going to get the microbiome that
Mm.
it needs going through the vaginal canal. And so I quickly had this panic of maybe what is this going to mean for my son? I knew having a vaginal birth was not an option for me based on a previous surgery I had. So, what is the vaginal microbiome and how is it different from the gut biome? And then let's dive into that a little bit, because I I think it's important for people to know the differences. And I know, like I said, for me, I was really panicked about that for the health of my child, without having that being an option. So, if you could dig into
Mm.
that a little bit, please tell us more.
For sure. First, I just wanna talk about the microbiome because we actually have microbiome everywhere in and on our body. We are actually humans having a bacteria experience because we have more bacterial cells than we actually have human cells. And so a microbiome is really just a colony of bacteria that colonizes in a certain location and makes up a current environment within that location. So, a lot of us know more now about the gut microbiome. It's definitely been something that's come more to the forefront, popular on social media. More people are talking about it. We are now all know about probiotics. A lot of people are taking probiotics, eating fermented foods. But when we're looking at the gut microbiome needs to have a very, very, very diverse environment. We have trillions of bacteria living in there and multiple different species of bacteria living in there, which is what we want. We want it to be as diverse as possible. Then when we go into the vaginal microbiome is a completely different colony, and we want it to be as least diverse as possible. And the main microorganism or the main bacteria that we want to proliferate and thrive in the vaginal microbiome is something called the lactobacillus species. So if you look at the back of even in the gut, we have tons of lactobacillus in the gut as well. But in the vaginal microbiome, the lactobacillus species in particular is very, very important to be very high because it releases something called lactic acid. This lactic acid is going to make that environment in the vagina very acidic. And we want this acidic environment in the vagina so that it can ward off and kill any potential pathogenic bacteria that might find a cozy little place to hang out and start to thrive and build up. So long story short is larger diversity in the gut microbiome, smaller diversity in the vaginal microbiome. Vaginal microbiome is full, we want it to be full of lactobacillus species. There's 4 different subtypes of lactobacillus species that we don't have to get into today, but within those subtypes, certain ones they're actually still just in the infancy of researching those different subtypes and what more of the benefits are. But that lactobacillus species environment is going to create that acidic environment, keeping it at a nice pH level to, again, ward off the bad bacteria and keep in the good bacteria so that we can have a nice, healthy environment.
So, for anyone who's listening who doesn't already know, can you tell us why this is so critical to fertility?
So in order to conceive, obviously we need to have a healthy menstrual cycle. We need to have a healthy womb. When we are talking about our womb, this is we think about women's reproductive organs. We've got lots of stuff down there. We've got our ovaries, our fallopian tubes, our uterus, our cervix, and our vagina. The vagina is kind of like the first pathway or the first opening that is going to then move its way up into the cervix and then into the uterus. So there also is uterine microbiome, and you can also get your uterine microbiome tested as well. That's a whole other story. So it's really important. So in order for women to conceive and to, I guess, have improved fertility outcomes, we want to make sure that that vaginal microbiome and uterine microbiome environment is is healthy, is optimized. And if we have pathogenic bacteria living in there, that could increase inflammation. That could cause maybe some what's called endometritis, or um, pretty much have an unfavorable environment for maybe sperm to survive, and for a potential fertilized embryo to really be able to flourish and thrive. A lot of women who have recurrent loss or ectopic pregnancies, these should be some red flags to do some further investigation into the vaginal and uterine microbiome environment.
And how would you know that you're either in balance or out of balance if you're not quite to the place of having losses or, um,
Yeah.
you're just starting out? Like, how do you know that you're in balance or not?
Well, there's a couple different ways. It's not really a simple answer is if it looks like this or it feels like this, you're good to go, because a lot of people are before you even try to conceive. A lot of these symptoms are asymptomatic and you don't actually know until you get tested. So, for anybody who's dealt with UTIs or bacterial vaginosis or have had yeast infections, they will for sure let you know that they have had uncomfortable symptoms, whether it's like a swollen vulva. They can see that it's red and inflamed down there. It might be itchy, quite itchy, especially if you're dealing with a candida overgrowth. There might be some pain and burning sensation, especially during intercourse. Um, and you might see additional discharge that isn't doesn't fall within the normal parameters of healthy cervical mucus throughout your menstrual cycle. Maybe the discharge is a little bit foul smelling, like fish or yellow, or sometimes a tinge of green, which could indicate that there is a little bit of an infection down there. So you can experience the symptoms. So that is one way to understand and know well, something is a little bit off down there. Something smells a little bit off, feels off. I'm seeing abnormal discharge. I'm having pain during intercourse. These are great telltale symptom signs. But there are a lot of bacterial overgrowth, like aerobic vaginosis. There's bacterial vaginosis, but there's also aerobic vaginosis where a lot of times you're completely asymptomatic, but you still have some overgrowth of not beneficial bacteria hanging out. And one of the best ways that you can look is just by doing some testing. So
And what are those tests? Which tests do you recommend, and how does that work? Is it something that we go to a doctor to do? Is it something we do at home?
yeah, so right now, I mean, it's wonderful because there's so many companies coming out right now that allow you to do a lot of this testing at home in the comfort of your own home. And so typically there's a couple different testing companies that I use with my clients, depending on how extensive of a test we're looking for. So there is a company called Fertility, which is kind of like the gold standard of tests. They're quite expensive. They are based out in Greece, but the return on investment, in my opinion, is always beneficial, especially if you've been struggling for quite some time. But this gives you both a test for uterine to understand your uterine microbiome and your vaginal microbiome. So, what does that testing process Look like? There's two different test collection methods. When we're looking at the uterine microbiome, then we actually have to do that by collecting menstrual blood. So you have this little kit where you're going to collect your menstrual blood, and then you send it off once you've collected it. And then the vaginal microbiome is tested during just through just like a vaginal swab. So you get both test kits mailed to you. You do it in the comfort of your own home. You kind of follow the instructions as it says. You send it off to the lab, usually within a few weeks. You're getting your report with the results. And then from there, you would then take that report with the results. They also give you like a treatment protocol and what they would recommend to treat if they're seeing high pathogenic bacteria. And then from there, you take that to your OB or your general physician and ask for the remedy and then kind of follow through. In addition to remedying it with maybe like an antibiotic, which a lot of the times is the case, it is really, really important that just like our gut, we are also seeding our vaginal microbiome with those healthy, good probiotics. So just like you would when maybe you are taking an antibiotic because you have a terrible flu or I don't know, you have some infection, you need to take an antibiotic. A lot of the times people know now, well, you have to take a probiotic with that at least 4 hours away. Otherwise, the antibiotic is going to kill the probiotic. And you must do a probiotic round, pretty high dose, about 30 days following the antibiotics. It's the same concept in the vagina. We have to see, so we're not only eradicating, killing off the pathogens that are in there. Usually, those antibiotics are quite strong and they do often kill off the good guys as well. So we have to then seed it and make sure we're giving it back a really nice vaginal probiotic suppository so that we're not only killing off what we need and but we're also bringing in the good stuff of what we need so that now if we think about it kind of like an ecosystem in soil, that soil now no longer has those pests, let's say, but they also have the nutrients to be able to now grow, healthy flowers and trees so that it has the raw materials that it needs to continue to be in a healthy state.
And what is the main cause for imbalances?
Okay, so I guess there's a lot of answers to that. What are the main causes? Stress is a big one. I know. So there's a couple pieces here. Obviously, physically, as there is your vagina is kind of like a warm, moist environment, and when there's a warm, moist environment, certain bacteria that we don't necessarily want there could potentially thrive and grow. So you need to make sure that we're just having good, healthy hygiene practices. If we're going to the gym and we're going to be in sweaty clothes, we need to take those off after, have a shower, put on some loose fitting clothes as opposed to sitting in your workout clothes for the next, 3 hours and being warm and sweaty down there. We also want to make sure that we're wiping front to back. Wait, yes, front to back, not back to front. So, simple hygiene practices like these. Also, having your partner tested because there is one sneaky pathogenic pathogenic bacteria known as ureaplasma. And ureaplasma can actually be passed back and forth from partner to partner. So getting your partner tested too. There are some at-home test kits for male microbiome as well through this Fertilisys company that I'm talking about. But that can be a way that maybe you're getting unwanted bacteria in you. And stress, when our body is in an environment that is less conducive for regeneration, healing, and recovery. This is going to create a potentially systemic inflammation and just doesn't allow the body to work in its most optimized way to again ward off bad bacteria and keep your immune system healthy. Just like we all know, maybe we can think back to when we've been really stressed. We've had a deadline to work towards and we get it done. And then once it's done, we like get sick. We're like, oh, we have to be in bed for 5 days because we're completely exhausted. Your adrenaline has been keeping you going to get your deadline done, but your body is actually running on empty. And then what happens when you're that big stressor is kind of alleviated and removed, your body now says, okay, hey, we need to like rest, sleep, relax, and build up our body and immune system again. And that's when you can kind of get some colds and flus or just achy, not feeling well. And this is not just happening inside our tummy or inside our brain. This is happening all over our body. We also might know that certain areas that maybe you have typically have lower back pain from time to time. If you're in this mode of go, 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 and then you finally have time to rest, you don't feel well, and then your back starts to flare up as well. So we all have weaknesses and imbalances in the body, and those typically like to showcase themselves, especially in times of major stress. So the vagina is no different. It's just not really talked about.
Right. And what's the correlation between the gut microbiome and the vaginal microbiome? So, for a lot of people, when they do take an antibiotic, for example, for some infection that they're causing, they know pretty quickly they're going to get a yeast infection. So, obviously, they're very tightly connected. What's the situation there?
Yes. So it's the same concept because an antibiotic, if you're taking it for the gut, a lot of the times, a lot of the antibiotics for the gut, or depending on whatever infection you're dealing with, could overlap and also kill off infections elsewhere in the body. So, as I had mentioned earlier, the antibiotic is very, very powerful. So, the antibiotic, no matter what, is going to wipe out the good bacteria. So if you're taking it for your gut, it's going into the bloodstream anyways, and somehow it's making its way down to the vagina, and it's kind of wiping and killing off the good lactobacillus species that is needed to keep that environment and that acidic pH. And that slightly gets wiped out, and then there's more of an opportunity now for that yeast to overgrow, and then potential yeast infection comes. So so I would say if the antibiotic is correlated that way. However, the colony of the bacteria that resides in both vagina and tummy are completely different. So they're other than the lactobacillus species, they're very completely different environments. But we could also get some of the, let's say, bacteria from our gut, because if we think about it, what's poop? Okay, we all know we poop. And what's poop? Poop's made of four things: bacteria, fiber, toxins, and water. So most of us, not most of us, a lot of us are dehydrated and a lot of us don't get enough water. So, sorry, enough fiber. So just think about those two things. If you're not having healthy, regular bowel movements, more water, more fiber usually does help. But when you are pooping, you're excuse me, I do get a little bit technical, but your anus is quite close to the vaginal opening. There's something called the perineum in between, which is no bigger than about an inch. And so this is why we say wipe front to back. But if you're wearing thongs, I remember my mentor told me that her mentor said, women should never wear thongs. It's a tightrope from your bum to your vagina. But there are potential bacteria that could also crawl and make its way into the vagina. So yeah, yeah. So there are so there is a connection there as well that depending on the health of your gut, and that could potentially impact the vagina as well. But if you've got that high lactobacillus, then usually it can kind of ward things off.
So I feel like that's a whole nother podcast, but the gut health to the vaginal health is super important. And I know we've talked about this before, but if you feel like you have gut issues, don't be surprised that that could be affecting your fertility as well. And I know with my fertility doctor, never asked me about my gut health
Never.
ever. Think I saw 4 fertility doctors in whole during that time. Nobody ever asked me what my bowel movements were like. And at that time, I had terrible stomach issues. So know that you do need to dig into that a little deeper. The RE is probably not the one that's going to help you to regulate that, but make sure that you're addressing it as well, hopefully before you're trying to get pregnant so that you can get that under control. So, let's talk strategy. What are your 3 to 5 actionable tips for somebody who's coming to see you, that wants to get a fast track to getting pregnant, and how do we support their vaginal microbiome?
Yes. As a holistic nutritionist and functional fertility coach, I guess 3 to 5 tips. I look at the body as a whole, and like you said, you kind of just actually perfectly segued into that with with what you had previously just mentioned about the gut health. So when somebody does come to me and wants to start working with me and says I'm either suffering from recurrent loss, dealing with unexplained infertility, suffering from failed treatments, or just not seeing that positive test, because at the end of the day, there's just no successful pregnancy happening from either of those situations, we really do have to look at this holistic functional approach. And the vaginal and the uterine microbiome is oft again, vaginal, uterine, and gut microbiome is often underlooked, not looked at all, especially when we come to, especially when we're working with REs or fertility clinics. So, top few things that I always recommend is we always have to first address the gut. What is going on with the gut? And without even getting into the nuances, but are you just pooping every day, once, twice a day at least? And what are the quality of those bowel movements? Thinking about your gut just in general, are you dealing with bloating, indigestion, stomach pain? Although this might be normal for you, this isn't something that's common and should be addressed and looked at further. I do want to just have a small caveat here as well, because just like the vaginal microbiome, sometimes with the gut, there a lot of times there are things that are asymptomatic as well. You might not feel like you have a gut imbalance, but there still might be something else going on there. So that's first and foremost, are you pooping every day? What's the quality of your bowel movements? And do you have any indigestion, stomach discomfort that you're dealing with? The second thing I always look at as well, and this will tie into the vaginal microbiome, is looking at your menstrual cycle parameters. This is my whole area of the fertility awareness practitioner. I did my certification with Lisa Hendrickson Jack. I'm not sure if you know who she is. She wrote a beautiful book, The Fifth Vital Sign, and I really learned about the health of the menstrual cycle parameters through her program. And this is, in my opinion, too, top priority that needs to be looked out. What is the quality of your menstrual blood? How long are you bleeding for? What are your menstrual cycle parameters looking like? Are you ovulating when you're supposed to be ovulating? What does that cervical mucus pattern look like? So, really understanding the nuances of the menstrual cycle. That's also going to help us identify if there's maybe any additional imbalances in the vaginal microbiome. And then, thirdly, I like to do the deep dive into the vaginal microbiome. So, talking about potential we have to look at somebody's history. Um, do you have chronic cases of yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, or UTIs, even in the past? And maybe they've gone away or they're maybe laying dormant now, but what does your history look like? And when you had that, what was your treatment plan and protocol? How much antibiotics were you taking in the past? Did you wipe everything out? Have you recolonized it back? And then obviously looking at some of the symptomatic pieces. A lot of women don't understand the cervical mucus patterns and what that kind of looks like throughout the cycle. We're actually supposed to be dry most of the cycle, and we have more kind of wet days, usually, mid follicular leading up to ovulation. And then obviously your period is your period. But after your period, depending on how long your follicular phase is, and in the luteal phase, you're supposed to be quite dry. I know a lot of women who are wet all the way through, and then we have to dive deeper. What does that mean? What is the quality of that mucus? Um, uh, and we dive into different sensations and so forth. And then from there, we can do deeper diving with testing. So, gut, menstrual cycle parameters, and then doing cervical mucus, diving more into the cervical mucus and vaginal health. Always.
Amazing. I feel like most of those things we are not taught, well, all of those things we're not taught in
No.
school, and it should be something that we do know just as general information, being with females and women, and knowing that this is what it's supposed to look like, knowing what our cycles are like. Like you, I'm sure a lot of people would say this is normal, but understanding truly what statistically should be normal and knowing if you're above or below that and how it affects your fertility is really key for when you do start to try to get pregnant, knowing what you're going to have ahead of you, so to speak. So, how would you know if you actually have recolonized after, historical information of or of yeast infection or UTIs or whatnot? Like, how do you know that you're back to normal? Is it
Y a
because
test.
all of those things are, or doing the actual
You would
test?
do the test. Yes,
Okay.
you could do a vaginal microbiome. So there are different testing companies. The Fertilis is one that I had recommended. Again, it's a higher price point, but there are smaller tests. EVVY is a great one that's only available in the United States. For myself as a practitioner, I also have access to vaginal microbiome tests that I order for my clients depending on where they live in the world. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, I like to test, don't guess. That's where I lie. That's where I sit. But again, when we think about, especially if someone is struggling to conceive, this can be very, very frustrating, hopeless, and there's a lot of fear under that as well. So I always say, let's be strategic on what we're actually testing based on your entire intake and your health history, because every individual case is so unique and individualized. But yes, we could go for a test because it tells you how high, what's the species, how high is the lactobacillus species that we want in there. It's going to say low, medium, high. Different tests will give you different metrics to tell you how high or low it is. So we just test.
Couldn't agree with you more. I feel like the more information and knowledge we have, the more power we have to navigate the situation that we're in. And I do want to point out that it's important to, you may be able to order these tests, but it's important to know how to translate these
Yes.
tests and what they mean to you, because as Nora started to say at the beginning, we do need all the microbiome in our body. There are trillions and trillions of cells in our system that we actually need. So we want to make sure that you're not just reading this and saying, "Oh no, I have this or that." You need it, but it's the degree of what you need and how it's showing up in your body that's going to affect your fertility. So, having somebody like Nora to translate that for you and figure out what the next steps are to get you to a balanced state is really, really important. So, I just want
Thank
to add
you.
that. Nora, where can everyone find you and work with you?
Yeah, my website is usually the best place, www.naturallynora.ca. So I am Canadian.ca, but I'm sure Elizabeth, maybe I'll throw it into the show notes so it's easy for people to find. You can find me on Instagram at naturally_Nora. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned at the beginning, I also have a podcast. And exactly like you said before, Elizabeth, we are not taught about our health, our menstrual cycle parameters in the way that I have described today. Before we kind of hit record, we were both talking about how much we both love the fertility space. But this is precisely why I started my podcast 3.5 years ago, because I just thought we need an outlet for women to learn and understand this. So that's precisely why I've created my podcast. So I've got tons of free good information on the podcast. So podcast, the Ultimate Pregnancy Prep Podcast, Instagram at naturally_Nora, and my website, www.naturallynora.ca.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's so much good information here. And I know that you are full of the passion and obsession almost of
Yes.
as I am with all of this. And I appreciate that because I think again, this is how we start to bring awareness to opening these conversations for people to talk about the things that need to be talked about in order to try to shift the narrative and how people go to approach pregnancy and having healthy pregnancies, with so much in our world right now kind of fighting against us, um, chemically and everything else that's you know going against our systems, I feel like. So this is really helpful. Thank you for being here and sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Friends with Fertility. We hope that you found the stories, insights, and tips as inspiring and informative as we did. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Your friends with fertility are here for you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and more fertility resources. Until next time, stay hopeful.